Headlines this month promised archaeologists had just uncovered terrifying pyramid paintings, and that they were somehow actually real, as if the alternative had ever seriously been on the table, as if some earlier generation of Egyptologists had spent a career studying elaborate forgeries without noticing. Strip away the dramatic framing, and what remains underneath it is something genuinely fascinating. Decades-old Egyptian tomb art, freshly examined with modern digital imaging software, revealing painted, details invisible to the naked eye for well over a century. Nobody discovered a new pyramid. Nobody uncovered a hidden chamber. What actually happened was quieter, stranger, and in its own way more interesting than the headline led on. The imagery driving most of this recent viral coverage traces back to a real, documented Egyptian site called Beni Hassan, a cemetery carved directly into limestone cliffs on the east bank of the Nile in central Egypt, roughly 245 kilometers south of Cairo. The site contains 39 rock-cut tombs belonging to regional governors and military leaders from Egypt's Middle Kingdom period, dating to somewhere between 2055 and 1650 before the Common Era, a span of Egyptian history that predates the more famous New Kingdom pharaohs like Tutankhamun by many centuries. Egyptologist Percy Newberry first surveyed and documented the tombs between 1893 and 1900, and researchers from Australia's Macquarie University have continued re-examining this site in more recent decades, describing it as one of the most complete and historically important collections of Middle Kingdom tomb art anywhere in Egypt. The tombs themselves are strikingly different in character from the more famous funerary art most people picture when they imagine ancient Egypt. Rather than focusing narrowly on the afterlife and divine judgment, the walls at Beni Hassan are covered with detailed scenes of everyday life, farming, hunting, fishing, dancing, and, most distinctively, wrestling, painted in registers that stack scene upon scene across an entire wall like panels in an extended visual narrative. One tomb in particular contains an extensive sequence of wrestling scenes depicting dozens of paired figures locked in different holds and positions, widely regarded by sports historians as among the earliest detailed visual documentation of organized athletic combat anywhere in the ancient world, with some researchers cataloging well over 100 distinct wrestling positions, captured across a single tomb's walls. Other tombs depict soldiers training and taking part in what appears to be a naval siege, offering historians a rare, detailed glimpse into Middle Kingdom military organization at a moment in Egyptian history shaped heavily by the civil unrest and fragmented political authority that followed the collapse of the earlier Old Kingdom state. These scenes were never designed to be frightening at all. They were designed to preserve in vivid painted detail the accomplishments and daily concerns of the regional governors buried beneath them, a permanent visual record intended to accompany them into the afterlife exactly as they had lived. Now here's where it gets disturbing for anyone assuming the recent viral coverage describes some kind of brand new archaeological find. It does not. The paintings themselves have been known, documented, and studied by Egyptologists for well over a century. What changed recently is not the paintings, but the tools available to examine them. Researchers applying a digital image enhancement technique called DS-Tretch, originally developed for analyzing prehistoric rock art and adapted from color processing methods first created at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory for Satellite and Mars, rover imagery, have been running enhanced photographic analysis directly on the walls at Beni Hassan, and the results have genuinely surprised specialists in the field. Read that again, slowly. This is not a metal detector turning up a lost tomb. This is the same color processing math NASA once used to sharpen photographs beamed back from Mars, repurposed to squeeze extra visual information out of 3,000-year-old pigment that has faded past the point where human eyes alone can reliably make sense of it. The specific mathematical technique underlying DS-Tretch, known as decorrelation stretching, was originally developed by researchers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in the late 1970s, then adopted by NASA in 2004 to enhance photographs captured by its Mars rovers, pulling additional color and surface detail out of images taken in the thin, dusty light of another planet entirely. The software analyzes the red, green, and blue color channels embedded in a standard photograph, applies a statistical transformation known as a Carhoonen-Loeve transformation that improves the intensity and separation between those channels, and effectively pulls faint, nearly invisible traces of ancient paint back into visible contrast, revealing brushstrokes that have sat quietly on that same limestone surface for roughly 4,000 years without ever fully disappearing. Rock art researchers studying prehistoric cave paintings adopted this same NASA-derived technique years before Egyptologists ever applied it to Beni Hassan, using it to recover faded pigment traces on exposed rock surfaces around the world, from painted shelters in the European Alps to ancient engravings scattered across multiple continents, in each case pulling barely there traces of ochre and mineral pigment back into visible contrast against a rock surface that had otherwise weathered into apparent blankness. Only relatively recently did researchers specifically trial the software against ancient Egyptian tomb walls, recognizing that the same underlying problem, faded, sun-damaged, centuries-old pigment sitting just below the threshold of ordinary human visual perception, applied just as well to a painted Egyptian tomb ceiling as it did to an open-air rock shelter, even though the two contexts, one a sealed underground burial chamber and the other an exposed cliff face, could hardly seem more different at first glance. Applied to the walls at Beni Hassan, this technique has already produced genuinely new findings, not new paintings, but newly visible details. Within paintings archaeologists already knew existed, enhanced imaging has revealed or confirmed depictions of pigs and bats, animals rarely depicted anywhere else in surviving Egyptian art, along with an unusually detailed rendering of a vulture that had gone almost entirely unnoticed in earlier surveys of the site, tucked into a corner of a wall that generations of visitors and researchers had walked directly past without recognizing what faint traces of pigment still remained there. These are not dramatic, world-altering discoveries in the sense a viral headline implies. They are exactly the kind of quiet, incremental findings that actually drive Egyptology forward, small but genuine additions to the historical record made walls the same way NASA treats photographs of another planet, and by researchers willing to combine that enhanced imaging with the painstaking discipline of digital epigraphy, the careful, methodical process of recording and cross-referencing every visible inscription and image against the wider body of known Egyptian iconography work. That rarely generates headlines on its own, but steadily accumulates into a far more complete picture of how Middle Kingdom Egyptians actually understood their own world. But that's not even the part of the story generating the most online attention right now. The wave of viral articles built around this research has focused far less on pigs, bats, and vultures, and far more on older, already well-known figures from Egyptian funerary belief, framed as newly unsettling once digital enhancement supposedly brought them into sharper focus. Chief among them is Ammit, one of the most genuinely frightening figures in the entire Egyptian pantheon, a composite creature combining the head of a crocodile, the front body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, three of the most physically dangerous animals ancient Egyptians actually encountered along the Nile, deliberately fused into a single mythological deterrent. Ammit's role in Egyptian religious belief was never subtle. According to the widely documented weighing of the heart ceremony described extensively in the Book of the Dead, a deceased person's heart was placed on one side of a scale, balanced against the feather of Maat, the goddess representing truth and cosmic order on the other. The ceremony itself was overseen by Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and the dead, who steadied the scale and ensured the weighing proceeded honestly, while Thoth, the ibis-headed god of writing and wisdom, stood ready to record the verdict. If the heart, weighed down by a lifetime of wrongdoing, tipped the scale, Ammit stood waiting to devour it on the spot, a punishment considered far worse than death itself in Egyptian belief, since a devoured heart meant the permanent total annihilation of a person's soul, denied any afterlife whatsoever, rather than simply facing judgment or punishment within one. Surviving copies of the Book of the Dead, painted on tomb walls and inscribed on papyrus scrolls buried alongside the deceased, frequently include a spoken formula known as the negative confession, in which the dead person recites a long list of sins they claim never to have committed, addressing dozens of specific deities by name in an attempt to tip that same scale in their favor before Ammit ever had the chance to act. That is a genuinely terrifying concept, and it has been sitting in plain sight inside painted tomb walls and inscribed papyrus scrolls for well over 3,000 years, thoroughly documented, translated, and taught in Egyptology courses worldwide long before any recent digital enhancement project touched it. Ammit appears repeatedly across surviving copies of the Book of the Dead, recovered from tombs throughout Egypt, rendered with remarkable artistic consistency across different eras and regions, evidence of just how central and widely understood this specific figure was within ancient Egyptian religious culture, rather than some obscure, rarely depicted footnote suddenly rediscovered by modern researchers. If you like and subscribe to this channel, this is exactly the kind of story worth digging into carefully. The places where genuinely ancient, well-documented imagery gets repackaged as a brand new discovery simply because a fresh technique happened to make an old photograph look sharper, and where a century of careful, unglamorous Egyptological scholarship gets flattened into a single, dramatic headline built for a scroll-through feed rather than a genuine understanding of what was actually found. Now bring the actual controversy into focus, because this is where the recent viral coverage takes its most questionable turn. Several widely shared articles built around this Beni Hassan research have leaned heavily into speculation about ancient astronauts, suggesting certain painted figures with unusual proportions, oversized heads, or unfamiliar surrounding objects might represent something closer to genuine historical evidence of extraterrestrial contact, rather than the product of a well-documented, symbolically dense religious art tradition that ancient Egyptians themselves left extensive textual explanation for. This is not a new interpretive framework invented for the current news cycle. It traces back directly to Swiss author Erich von Däniken's 1968 book, Proposing Ancient Astronaut Visitation. That same playbook has been applied to an enormous range of ancient sites over the decades, from the Nazca Lines in Peru, to the pyramids at Giza, to Pumapunku in Bolivia, to the Moai statues of Easter Island, each time following a strikingly similar formula. Take a genuinely impressive piece of ancient craftsmanship or artwork, strip away the extensive scholarly context explaining how and why it was actually made, and reframe the resulting mystery as evidence pointing towards something beyond ordinary human capability. The formula works precisely because most casual viewers never encounter the actual academic literature addressing these same questions in careful, unglamorous detail, leaving a dramatic, unverified alternative explanation to fill the gap left behind by that missing context, a gap that documentaries and viral articles are considerably better funded and better distributed to fill than the peer-reviewed journals where the actual answers have quietly sat for decades. Some of the current viral coverage explicitly acknowledges this tension even while indulging it, with several articles, including a direct disclaimer stating plainly that the paintings do not prove ancient aliens ever visited Egypt, and that no reliable archaeological evidence exists supporting any claim of documented extraterrestrial first contact. That kind of hedge, raising a sensational possibility in a headline while quietly walking it back several paragraphs later in the body text, has become a familiar pattern across this entire genre of ancient mystery content, designed to generate the emotional charge of a shocking claim while retaining just enough plausible deniability to avoid outright, easily falsifiable misinformation. Readers who only skim a headline and opening paragraph, which most casual social media traffic never moves past, walk away with the sensational framing fully intact, never reaching the buried caveat that would have complicated it. A structural imbalance built directly into how this kind of content tends to perform online regardless of the actual intentions behind any individual article. Now understand why Egyptologists find that specific interpretive leap so frustrating, because ancient Egyptian religious art was never meant to depict literal, naturalistic physical reality in the first place. Egyptian visual convention deliberately distorted proportion, scale, and anatomy according to strict, symbolic, and hierarchical rules that had nothing to do with representing what anyone actually looked like. Egyptian artists worked within an artistic system art historians describe as composite or respective, combining the most visually recognizable angle of each individual body part into a single figure, a profile head and legs paired with a frontal torso and eye, a convention maintained with remarkable consistency across roughly 3,000 years of Egyptian art history, precisely because it prioritized instantly recognizable symbolic clarity over naturalistic anatomical accuracy. Pharaohs and gods were routinely painted larger than surrounding figures, specifically to communicate cosmic and political importance, not physical height. A principal art historians call hierarchical scale, where a pharaoh might tower over servants and soldiers, rendered at a fraction of his painted size, despite standing at ordinary human height in reality. Composite animal-headed deities like Anubis, Thoth, and Sobek combined human bodies with animal heads specifically to symbolically encode divine attributes, judgment, wisdom, ferocity, rather than depicting literal hybrid creatures anyone believed physically existed walking among them. Ammit herself follows this exact same symbolic logic, her crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus components deliberately chosen because ancient Egyptians regarded all three animals as the deadliest predators they regularly encountered along the Nile, making Ammit's composite form a calculated visual shorthand for maximum, unmistakable danger, not an attempt to document some genuine hybrid creature anyone claimed to have actually observed. Oversized heads, elongated limbs, and unusual surrounding objects generally reflect this same deeply codified symbolic visual language, extensively documented and cross-referenced against thousands of surviving inscriptions that explain, often in the ancient Egyptians' own words, exactly what each figure and symbol was actually meant to represent, since Egyptian scribes routinely labeled their paintings directly with hieroglyphic captions identifying gods, actions, and offerings being depicted, leaving remarkably little genuine ambiguity for modern researchers to resolve through speculation alone. That symbolic tradition is precisely why serious Egyptological scholarship treats the ancient astronaut framing as a category error, rather than a genuine competing hypothesis. It is not that researchers have failed to consider the possibility and ruled it out through careful investigation. It is that the interpretive method itself misunderstands what the paintings were built to communicate. In the first place, pattern matching unfamiliar ancient religious symbolism against modern science fiction imagery, rather than against the extensive contemporaneous textual and archaeological record ancient Egyptians actually left behind explaining their own belief system in considerable detail. Now widen the lens beyond Beni Hassan specifically, because this same recent wave of coverage sits inside a much larger pattern of genuine, well-documented Egyptian archaeological activity currently underway across the country. Egyptian and international teams have continued uncovering new tombs at a striking pace through 2025 and into 2026, including a previously unknown tomb belonging to an official named Passer, discovered on the Nile's west bank by a Dutch archaeological mission from Leiden University in the summer of 2026, its walls decorated with paintings depicting Pacer worshipping various deities alongside his wife, and featuring a courtyard with architectural elements preserved well enough that researchers could still identify a mud brick platform designed to hold a funerary stela, flanked by a staircase and matching ramps leading toward the tomb's entrance. Separate excavations at Dashur, home to some of Egypt's earliest true pyramids, uncovered a roughly 4,300-year-old mastaba tomb featuring vividly preserved paintings of everyday life, donkeys threshing grain, ships sailing the Nile, and goods being traded at market, offering a strikingly ordinary human counterpoint to the more dramatic funerary imagery generating most of the recent online attention. Excavations at Saqqara, home to the step pyramid of Djoser, have continued yielding new tombs as well, with archaeologists there uncovering well-decorated burial chambers belonging to senior officials, regional rulers, and palace supervisors, their walls covered in hieroglyphic inscriptions and images of sacred animals rendered with the same vivid preservation that has repeatedly startled researchers working across multiple sites in the same general period, colors still bright enough after millennia underground, that early reports from the excavation team described the paint as looking almost freshly applied. Egyptian officials overseeing these excavations have publicly stated their expectation that additional tombs remain buried throughout the same general area, meaning the current wave of discovery shows no clear sign of slowing down anytime soon. Some of the country's leading Egyptologists have even floated the possibility that ongoing excavation at Saqqara could eventually reveal the tomb of Imhotep himself, the legendary architect credited with designing the step pyramid nearly 46 centuries ago, a discovery that would rank among the most ever actually materializes. That broader wave of genuine discovery matters because it demonstrates something the ancient astronaut framing consistently obscures, that Egyptian archaeology remains an active, rapidly developing field producing real, well-documented findings on a near-continuous basis, without needing to reach for extraterrestrial explanations to remain genuinely compelling. New tombs, newly enhanced imagery, and newly translated inscriptions arrive steadily enough that legitimate researchers rarely need to manufacture drama. The actual research, carried out patiently across seasons of careful excavation and painstaking digital analysis, already produces more than enough genuine intrigue on its own, without borrowing imagery from science fiction to hold anyone's attention. So what does it actually mean that archaeologists just uncovered terrifying pyramid paintings, and that they are, as the headlines insist, actually real? It means digital image processing technology originally built to sharpen photographs of the Martian surface is now helping Egyptologists recover faded brushstrokes from limestone tomb walls painted roughly 4,000 years ago, revealing pigs, bats, and vultures alongside far older, already well-documented depictions of Ammit waiting beside the scales, of Judgment, Anubis steadying the balance, and Thoth recording the final verdict. None of it required aliens. It required patient scholarship, careful photography, and a piece of software originally designed to help a rover navigate an entirely different planet, repurposed to help modernize finally see clearly what ancient Egyptian artists painted onto stone millennia before anyone thought, to ask whether the colors might still be hiding something worth looking at twice. The real story here was never about extraterrestrial visitors at all. It was about how much information can survive quietly inside a fading pigment for 4,000 years, waiting patiently for the right combination of curiosity and technology to finally make it visible again, and about how easily that same quiet, genuinely remarkable achievement gets buried underneath a headline promising something far more sensational than the truth ever actually needed to be.